On today's episode of Spiritual Chats, I've decided to go rogue and not have a guest. This is the first episode I'll be doing solo and likely the only, I'm not sure, but I really was set on having a mediumship episode for spooky season. I was had the idea and I've been reaching out to so many different mediums online to see if they wanted to sit down and chat to me about their process. But in particular, I really wanted an episode that helped teach you how to hone and use mediumship skills. And I've had no luck with anyone who wants to sit down and talk about this. And I understand it because it's one thing to tell stories about mediumship experiences or ghost encounters, but it's a whole other to try to tell someone how to actually use those skills themselves. So, lucky for us, I suppose, mediumship is one of the psychic gifts that I do find comes quite naturally to me. There was a time many years ago where I was actually offering mediumship readings to clients, but I honestly felt that doing mediumship readings was incredibly draining. And because I'm not a trained therapist, I just felt like I wasn't the right person to be doing these type of readings because they just involve such heavy and hard topics for the living. I mean, we're talking about death, which right away is a very challenging, deep, dark conversation, but especially people that go to mediums, they tend to be people who lost someone in a way that is very challenging. Either the person chose to end their own life and it's confusing for the person still alive, or they may have had a very tumultuous relationship before the person passed away and therefore want some answers or closure. And I just felt that opening that door and doing those readings without being able to provide adequate support for the living was just not something that I felt called to and felt okay with doing. And I'm not trying to judge any mediums that don't have experience in doing traditional therapy by any means. I know there are mediums who don't have traditional therapy licenses or education and they do amazing at their job. So I'm definitely not here trying to say that I think all mediums need to be therapists by any means. I just felt for myself personally, one of my favorite things about doing readings for clients is giving people practical advice for moving forward. That is my thing. When I do a reading for someone, I always want them to leave the reading feeling like they have answers. Even if maybe I can't give you the exact answer you're wanting, I hope that I can always give some type of action that you can take moving forward. And I just felt like with mediumship, there was never those answers, right? Dealing with grief is so complex and there isn't really a step that you can take to move forward besides, of course, trying to heal and let go. And that is a very broad topic. And I felt like if I had more of a therapy background, I would be able to give people real, genuine steps to helping them grieve and move forward. But regardless, so nowadays I tend to refuse doing any mediumship readings for clients. That's just my personal feeling, but I do still practice mediumship for myself to connect with loved ones. And so in this episode, I'd love to give you some practical tools, tips, and advice for you to practice mediumship on your own, to connect with loved ones that have passed or ancestors you'd love to reach out to. And I hope that this episode will provide you with even just one tip to move forward and try mediumship readings if you feel so called. And if not, we'll be chatting all things mediumship, talking with spirits. So I do hope that regardless, you'll gain something from this episode, which is always my goal with these episodes, is that you gain one little nugget of wisdom at the very least. As I mentioned, mediumship and connecting with the deceased has always come fairly easily to me. And it's funny because if you're a clairvoyant or someone who is well connected with their psychic and intuitive gifts, you might resonate with this. But as much as other people think my mediumship abilities are really cool or neat, and they're like, why don't you do mediumship if you're able to? You should do it all the time and practice it. It's so cool. But I personally would actually give it anything to be more skilled with energy healing like Reiki or craniosacral therapy. I have my level 1 Reiki certification, but healing through my hands is just not something that comes super naturally or easily to me. I even had the opportunity to spend my time with one of the best Reiki and cranio practitioners ever, who took time out of her life to teach me one to one and spent so much time with me. I learned so much through her work and through her teachings. She was the most amazing, skilled practitioner ever. And even with her help and practicing on clients with her, I was just never able to do it properly. I just felt like I was never that good at doing it. It just didn't come supernaturally to me. And I say that because, yes, I am skilled with mediumship, but it doesn't mean that I'm just good at every psychic or intuitive ability. I note this because there are many psychic abilities that come more naturally to us than others. And some psychic abilities you may struggle with a little bit. It doesn't mean by any means that you shouldn't practice them or hone your skills, but as with most things in life, it sure is so much easier to devote your time and energy to things that you at least have some natural ability with. And especially when you're doing something as a professional, it can take years and years and years to get to that place where you feel confident to not only charge money, but people's time and know that you're really genuinely helping them and doing something for them. So that's one of the reasons why I'd say this, because I don't want you to think that just because you aren't naturally inclined towards mediumship that you can't do it. It just might not be something that you want to do all the time or do as a professional, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it in your personal life, like myself, to read for people that you know that have passed. So, I'd love to explore some tips to practice mediumship on your own and help you tune into that psychic channel that I believe resides within all of us, especially if you enjoy listening to my podcast or engaging with my content or content similar to mine. That tells me that you have a natural inclination toward the arcane and the mystical, making it much more likely that you'd be successful at honing your own mediumship abilities. I've been doing a lot of private readings for clients over the past few months, not mediumship, but just charm and tarot readings. And I've seen firsthand how intuitive and psychic so many of you naturally are. Even if you don't intentionally work with or explore the spiritual realm, I see it in my readings constantly. The way that people describe what's going on in their life or what they feel drawn to is exactly what spirit is trying to tell them, or the energy that I'm connecting with in their reading. I can just tell that they have this incredible sense of psychic and intuitive abilities. My personal interest was first piqued by mediumship when I was around 15 years old or so. My mom used to take me to psychics and mediums, which I absolutely loved. She saw it more as a fun practice and less of a serious and sacred art. But whenever I received a reading or witnessed one, I always knew exactly what the medium was going to say. And at the time, I didn't realize it was because I also held skills of intuitive abilities. But as I learned to explore my skills, I see now that I always had at least somewhat of an innate ability, as I know many of you do as well. I still remember when the Long Island medium, or as my ex-girlfriend always referred to her, the Long Island iced tea medium, and now I can't help but call her that. Every time I mention her or think about her, it's like drilled in my brain, Long Island iced tea medium. And I had to consciously think about what her actual name is because I'm scared that I'm going to publicly call her Long Island iced tea medium. She is the Long Island medium. Anyways, you might remember that show. If not, it's fine. But it aired on TLC in like 2011. And she would basically have on clients who she would talk to their deceased loved ones. And I always felt so jealous that she had this show where she was able to commune with the dead. I didn't know why I felt envious at the time because I didn't think I had any spiritual abilities or inclination at all. But I see now that it was because on some level, I think I knew I could do the same. And therefore, it kind of stirred something within me that I interpreted as jealousy. So if you ever find yourself, envious or jealous of somebody's spiritual practice, it might be because you have a natural inclination yourself to do such thing. Even if you're maybe not the best at it or you've tried it and it wasn't super easy for you, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't explore it and look into it a little bit. I think sometimes that feeling of jealousy can be a really great indicator that someone is doing something that you want to be doing. And I know that we can't all become billionaires or something of the like, but especially when it relates to someone's creative or spiritual practice, I think why not explore it a little bit if you're feeling those feelings. Now, the first tip that I will mention to help you become a better medium that I think plays a huge role in any communication with spirit is learning to discern spirit versus ego. And especially for those who are just starting out on their spiritual journey, ego plays a huge role. I mean, it always does, but I find that especially on our spiritual journey, like one of the very first things that we're faced with is reconciling the ego. And when you open your eyes to spirit and you see this mystical, magical world, whatever that means to you, it's really hard not to get a boost of ego. I mean, suddenly you're seeing the world through a new lens. It's exciting, and you can see so quickly and so viscerally how spirituality can improve your life. And I personally believe that one of the first steps is this battle with ego. We're faced with our ego as we level up spiritually, right? Like, are we going to think that we're better than others? Or can we move past this ego to a state of humble awareness and consciousness? I think that many spiritual people get stuck on the first step of ego. It's hard for them to see others as equals, always thinking they're better than those who are less spiritual than them. And I saw this in myself when I first started my spiritual journey, and I've seen it in countless others as well. I think it's very normal, and it's a human part of the spiritual awakening. But I bring this up because if we don't have our ego in check, as we start to do more psychic and intuitive work, we're just never going to get anywhere. I believe that a healthy dose of ego is important and crucial if we lack confidence and self esteem. I mean, we won't get anywhere, right? Like, I wouldn't have a podcast where I'm babbling on and on for goddess knows how many minutes if I didn't have a little bit of an ego, or an ego generally. But what we don't want is the ego making us think we're above anything or anyone. And this is the fastest and easiest way to cut ourselves off from intuition and from spirit. Being open minded and accepting the role of the student is crucial in doing psychic work. You never want to assume that you know everything or that you've figured it out, because by doing so, you're effectively closing yourself off completely from spirit. If we agree that we believe in spirit and we believe in the deceased having a role in some type of afterlife or alternate reality or liminal space of some kind, a different timeline, whatever it may be, if we believe that they exist, and that they can communicate with us, we sort of have to acknowledge that these beings can see, sense, and even know more than we do as humans. So, inherently, the very first step of communicating with spirit is acknowledging that you know less than them. And what makes a good student? Well, someone who is trusting of their teacher, someone who doesn't constantly push back against the teachings or think that they're better or above them, and someone who is just open and willing to learn. If you are familiar with the tarot, this type of energy really reminds me of the pages, and specifically the Page of Swords. So as you move through your spiritual journey in connecting with spirit or with the deceased, consider channeling and embodying that Page of Swords, asking, how can I be curious? What more do I have to learn? How can I be more open to hearing what spirit has to tell me? If you're curious to begin mediumship work, one of the easiest places to start is by connecting your deceased person to a symbol or a word. And now, if you're not interested in doing mediumship work, you can also do this exact same process, but connect the symbol rather than to a deceased person, to spirit, your higher self, your angels, your deities, whatever it may be, to some type of divine being. I find that this method of connecting a symbol to spirit or the deceased is one of the easiest ways to receive messages from them. And this is not a message necessarily like an entire life story, but it is just a sign that they are listening to you and that they are there, which is really the first place that we want to start with mediumship, right? We want to know that they are there, that they are hearing us, that we are communicating with them. And I find that symbols can be such a great way to do this. I am a huge fan of symbols in my spiritual practice, hence why I connect so deeply with charm casting, because it's essentially just connecting with symbols. And all of my connection with symbols and how I started to really see the importance of this was that I had a family member who passed away when I was a teenager. And before she died, she once gifted me this really small stuffed bird, and it was a blue jay. It was so cute. It was like this little stuffed animal blue jay. I kept it in my room, and I would always think of her when I saw it on my shelf. After her passing, I started seeing blue jays fairly frequently after never really noticing them in my day-to-day life. I then attended a flame reader who used smoke on paper. So she had a candle, and while that candle had a flame, she would hold a blank piece of paper above the flame and let the smoke that was rising from the candle create this type of message on the paper. She would then interpret it based on what she saw, similar to a tea leaf reading, but using smoke. So when she started looking at my sheet of paper, she saw a little bird. And the craziest part was that even though she was using smoke and the colors were gray and black, there was a really, really distinct circle of blue inside the bird. And I could see it as well. She was shocked that there was blue. I, to this day, am shocked that there was this blue color right on the bird. And immediately I knew that it was this blue bird, a message from my family member who passed. And so whenever I noticed the blue bird after that, I took it as a sign that she was near. And one of the craziest things is that while I was thinking about writing the script and what I was going to talk about in this podcast, I actually went back and revisited this experience of the blue jay in my mind. I was thinking about it. And a couple of hours after I was thinking about it, I left my house to go do an errand. And as I stepped outside, I saw a blue jay. I could not believe my eyes when I first saw it because I don't see blue jays very frequently. I mean, I see maybe one or two of them a year. So the fact that I saw one within hours, a couple of hours after I had been thinking about this, was just another symbol. And I feel like it's another sign that I'm supposed to be telling you this message today, because I think it's so important to be open to those messages and to pay attention to them, because I could have not seen that blue jay, or I could have not thought about this deceased loved one when I saw it. But it's really about stringing together those pieces to make a cohesive story and to really receive those messages. So one thing that I would consider doing is think about what the deceased person you want to connect with enjoyed doing. Did they love fishing, Van Gogh, bourbon? Did they love a specific color that you always think of, or a certain animal? And if you spent time with this person, what did you do together when they were alive? Like, did you knit? Did you go for walks? Did you drink together? Did you do art together? That can help you as well to see what type of symbols you want to pay attention to. And if you don't know your deceased person or spirit and you're not sure of these answers, that's completely fine too, because there's other ways that we can find symbols and connect them to the deceased. But knowing them can be a good place to start, because if you do know someone, there's usually one or two things that just immediately stick out in your mind when you think of them. This can even be a cartoon character. I have a family member who passed away, and in their lifetime, whenever I thought of them, I always thought of Winnie the Pooh. And whenever I would watch or see Winnie the Pooh, I always thought of them. They reminded me of Winnie the Pooh so much. So that would be a really great symbol to start with, and to consider that that might be a way that they would communicate with me. So moving forward, if I thought that, I would then start to think about, where do I see Winnie the Pooh? Do I ever think of them and then see Winnie the Pooh after? Similar to that bluebird message that I just told you about. The fact that I thought about the blue jay and that past loved one, and then within a couple of hours saw a real blue jay outside my door, that's a really great confirmation from spirit. And it doesn't have to be that you see this thing in real life, of course, but if it comes up in a way that is unique, it's something to definitely consider. For instance, if you think of your deceased person and they love to carve pumpkins with you, well, if you're seeing a jack-o'-lantern around Halloween, that's probably not an indication that they're speaking to you, right? Because logically, we're going to see many pumpkins around Halloween if we live in North America. But if you were to see a jack-o'-lantern, say in March, that actually might be a symbol that they're speaking to you, especially if you had recently thought of them, or there was some type of thread that you could see, invisible string that was connecting that jack-o'-lantern to your person. And as I mentioned, if you didn't know what they enjoyed, or you're just feeling a little bit lost here, that's totally fine. Because if you use divination tools, you could always connect with spirit and ask them to show you how they're speaking to you. So ask the deceased to show you what symbols they're showing you, how they want to show up for you. Charm casting is a great tool for this type of thing. So you could pull one charm with the intent that it will be a symbol the deceased are using to connect with you. That can be really helpful. And you can also do this with tarot or oracle or Lenormand cards as well. Ask the deceased to show you the symbol they're using to communicate with you. And when pulling the card, try looking at all of the small details in the background, in the foreground. Is there a small boat in the background you didn't notice before? A rainbow on the card, a food on the card? Is there a castle or something out of place like a shoe or a ribbon? If you see or take notice of a few symbols and you still aren't sure exactly which one may be the symbol they're trying to show you, take a second to write down the symbols you're seeing on either a piece of paper or the notes app of your phone, and be sure to keep that list close to you so you can refer back to it and keep track of those symbols that you've written. And then over the coming weeks, see if you notice that symbol. If you're waiting in line at the grocery store, scrolling on social media, if you see someone wearing a graphic t-shirt with this symbol, or notice a bumper sticker while you're waiting in traffic. This part may require patience and attentiveness. For some of you, you may see the symbol in the same day, like I did with that blue jay the other day. But others, it may take a few weeks to see the symbol, and it really requires patience. And if divination tools aren't your thing either, you can also sit in meditation and request that the deceased you want to hear from show you how they communicate with you. So take time to sit, let your mind be free of thoughts, focusing only on your breath and calling in this deceased loved one. You can even do a ritual for this by setting a candle, laying out a photo of them or items that remind you of them, or anything else that you use to connect with spirit or that would work well with mediumship, like specific crystals, herbs, or whatever you work with in your magical practice, if you want to take it a little bit further. Of course, you can just sit in meditation, no tools required. But take as long as you would need and really just sit in meditation and ask them to show you any specific symbols and really pay attention to what comes through. You may need to sit in meditation a few times before anything comes through, or you may want to sit in meditation a few times to see if the same symbol comes through, and then paying attention in your daily life if it kind of shows up again. I'm a huge fan as well, I've mentioned a few times, about simply asking spirit to show me things. So I'll sit in contemplation and call forward the deceased I want to connect with, and then I'll ask them to show me over the next few weeks the symbol that they want to use to connect with me. After that, of course, it's important to keep this open mind and really pay attention to symbols and shapes, animals, colors, themes that you're seeing reflected in your life, especially when it's a weird coincidence that feels serendipitous, cosmic, or divinely guided, where you think, gee, that seems odd that I should see that here. If you notice that you keep seeing specific patterns or symbols or energies, or if it shows up in a really weird place, that's definitely something to keep note of. And an important thing for this process of understanding symbols is it's also important to be mindful of your thoughts and how and when those symbols are showing up. So, for example, I have a good story to actually indicate this. I was recently in bed one evening and I was reading a book on my phone. Yes, I know. I am a phone book reader instead of a Kindle or paperback. I feel like this is the most controversial thing that I'm discussing today. I feel like I'm going to have to sit down and do a 10-minute apology next week for the fact that I literally read everything on my cell phone and not on a Kindle or paperback. I don't know anyone else who does that, but I just find it the most handy. And I don't want to pay for a Kindle when I basically have a Kindle that is my phone. So please convince me if you think I need a Kindle. I can't go back to paperback. I just love the digital so much, and it's also way cheaper for me. But I could maybe be convinced to get a Kindle, but I don't know. Anyways, that is definitely the most controversial thing I'm discussing today. If you are a reader, you will understand the controversial nature of that phrase. But anyways, while I was reading my book on my phone, I was heavy in thought. Like I suddenly had my mind drift away from what I was reading. And I just got this really, really sudden and large rush of emotions. And I was thinking about a loved one who passed almost exactly a year to the date of thinking about this. And I was so sad and I just like felt awful. I felt that huge wave of hurt that I would just never see this person again and that we would never have the relationship that we had. And it was a lot to process. I was just sitting there, like on the verge of tears. And then my phone lit up with a text message, and it was from my husband. And he said, "Come outside, something cool." He was outside with the dog. And I was really happy to get a distraction from these heavy emotions that I was feeling. So I immediately jumped up and went outside to see him. And when I went out to meet him, he had me look up, and there were like 10 bats flying around our house, so many of them. They were flying back and forth, and they were all making so much noise with their little wings flapping. And it was dusk, so you could almost not see them. They looked like little shadows. And behind them, the moon was glowing, and it looked like a scene from some sort of movie or something. Like it was so cool. We don't usually see bats outside our house either. It was the first time we'd ever seen them. So, an interesting thing to note here is that in many cultures, bats are believed to guide people through periods of transition, especially transitions that are really difficult or frightening. And I will also note that in many spiritual practices, the bat is seen as a symbol of death and rebirth, but let's say death here for our particular needs. And it's also a symbol of intuition and spiritual awareness. So it's easy to shrug that off as a completely unrelated occurrence, and I know some people would, but in my experience, messages from spirit can sometimes be subtle or seemingly insignificant. It's not always going to bang you over the head. A lot of the time, the messages you'll receive from your deceased loved one will make you question if you actually saw it, if it really makes sense, if it's logical, if you're reaching or overreacting. Of course, sometimes there are moments that are just so undeniable, but in my experience, most of it is these little experiences where you really have to think about and put the pieces together. Oh, I was thinking about this person right before I saw this really strange, for me, symbol. So it's important to be mindful of your thoughts. And when you see that symbol or any symbol that is strange to you, really try to think about, were you worried about something working out right before you saw the symbol? Were you thinking of your deceased person? Were you feeling scared? Were you feeling hopeful? So being mindful of your thoughts is crucial in being able to discern when your loved one is trying to communicate with you. Now, I am not religious by any means, although I am incredibly spiritual. But one of my favorite quotes from Buddhism is that Buddha said that truth is obtained through knowing for oneself. Essentially, this means that the Buddhist philosophy, from what I've learned, I might be wrong, but to my understanding, is that it's really important to figure out things on your own instead of just blindly listening to someone else. And I am such a firm believer in doing whatever spiritual practices work for you personally, that you see results with, that you fully believe and trust in, that feel right to you. Of course, as long as it's not harming any other individual. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. In my personal experience, what has worked for me better than most other psychic practices for communicating with the deceased has been the practice of scrying. Now, if you've never heard the term of scrying, you've actually likely seen it before on TV or cartoons or movies. When you think of the classic fortune teller, she is often depicted with her crystal ball. She would theoretically use the crystal ball to practice what is known in divination as scrying. Scrying is this practice where you enter a meditative or focused state. You allow your mind to relax and become really open to receiving impressions or visions. And they can come in many forms. I mean, I know typically they're usually seen as a very clear vision showing up in the crystal ball like a movie. But in real life, the practice of scrying, your messages or impressions would come through in maybe in the form of images that you're seeing in your mind's eye, of symbols, colors, but could also come through as sounds that aren't actually there, smells that aren't actually there, or a physical feeling or sensation within your body. So, really, we're using the scrying tool as a way to connect with our clairs. So, if you know anything about the clairs of intuition, this is where we can use whichever ones resonate with us or work with us or all of them. And if you want me to go into another episode about the clairs of intuition and how to use your intuition, we can absolutely do that. But I feel like this will be way too long if I get into this today. But basically, the interpretation of what you're seeing when you are scrying is very different than something like tarot, where there are set rules. And with scrying, it really depends on the scryer's own intuition and what they're picking up. So, more similar to charm casting, I think if you like charm casting or oracle cards, you might really enjoy the practice of scrying because you're really just picking up whatever comes and interpreting it in a way that resonates to you. Now, you can practice scrying through any means with any tools. You don't need a crystal ball to scry. And I think myself, I've only used a crystal ball once or twice in my life. In my shop, I actually sell obsidian scrying mirrors, which are little black mirrors made out of obsidian that are great for scrying because they're dark and easy to see a reflection in. Dark mirrors are very common to scry in, and you can even scry using a bowl of water and looking into the water. If you're connected to water, that could be a great method for you. And you can use a candle flame or smoke as well. What you really want to do here is relax your eyes and go into a somewhat meditative state. So, definitely focusing on breathing, focusing on relaxing the lids of your eyes and relaxing the focus of your eyes so that the world sort of becomes a little bit blurry. This can definitely take a few minutes. I find that having sounds can be very helpful. Having like witchy sounds or binaural beats, sounds that really put you into this meditative state as well. And from here, I would describe scrying as that kind of feeling when you're about to fall asleep and you have really weird thoughts or visions. And sometimes you might even sort of gain consciousness again and be curious if you were sleeping or awake because you saw things, like you saw dreams, but you know you weren't really sleeping. That's sort of how I would describe scrying in my experience. It's not exactly like that. I think you definitely feel more conscious rather than so sleepy, but it's this kind of questioning of, did I just see something? Was there a vision in my mind's eye? And I would say it's most similar to kind of about to be falling asleep, but I'm sure others may disagree. But that's just sort of how I would describe it to someone who's never scried before. When I was a child, I would often sit in my grandparents' back room and look out their big window at the wind that was blowing through these huge evergreen trees that they had in the backyard. And the way that the trees moved would really lull me into this state of near slumber. My granny would always point it out and say, "You're falling asleep again, the trees again." She would always take note that I would get so hypnotized by the trees and the way that they were moving. And interestingly, that same method is what I use today to scry. I actually often use scrying with trees. I've never heard of anyone else doing that, but all that to say, you can genuinely scry using any material because the point is that you're relaxing your mind and your eyelids and you're allowing visions and sensations or feelings to come through. And so when you are scrying with something like smoke, it is a lot easier to see shapes and symbols. But if you're scrying into something like an obsidian mirror or using trees, you're really just allowing reflection, allowing light to enter the eye and to see and sense different messages. It really does to me feel like hypnosis meets that almost dreamlike state. And because we are human, what we tend to see while scrying is definitely not like in the cartoons. You're not going to see a picture of somebody. I think about The Wizard of Oz where she looks in her crystal ball and she can perfectly see Dorothy walking around. Of course, we're not going to see anything like that, but it's very vague and hazy and feels like, did I really just see that or was I imagining it? It can really feel strange that you're seeing something that isn't there, and part of you might feel like you're lying or forcing something to happen. That is definitely very normal, and the importance here is to try to, as we talked about earlier, relax that ego, relax that anticipation, and be okay with the fact that you might not see or feel anything today, but you'll try again, and that's all that matters. I remember one of the first times I ever tried scrying. I had no idea what I was doing, and I really wasn't confident in my psychic abilities. It actually would have been about the exact same time that I started Emerald Lotus back in 2016 when I was just sharing free tarot spreads because I was learning tarot and I was also dabbling in a ton of divination skills as well. So I was staring in the crystal ball in a room full of women at this workshop. And the only thing that came into my mind was an image of this yellow question block, like that Mario in Nintendo would jump on and they would like spew gifts. So I don't even know. I felt like such an idiot. And I quietly muttered that, I saw some weird video game thing. And that's when the woman that I was reading for, she smiled and laughed. And she told me that she actually loved playing video games and that she wasn't surprised at all that I would see a Nintendo message. If I've learned anything over my years of doing psychic readings, it's to never doubt what you're seeing. Even if it doesn't make sense, definitely take a mental note or say it aloud if you're reading for someone else. Write it down and keep track of it somehow because at the moment it may seem crazy, but you never know who it may resonate with or how it might show up in your life later. I see this all the time in my readings for clients when I do charm and tarot readings. If you've had a reading with me, you know that when we start out the reading, I almost always channel messages first. And half the time when I'm channeling messages, I see the craziest things. I'm telling people I saw an elf or a lumberjack or I don't know, different symbols or signs. And when I'm saying it, I feel like such an idiot. And I'm sure that those of you listening are like, you saw what? But as we start to pull the cards and read the charms, it always seems to tie together and make sense why that energy was coming forward. So definitely try your best not to judge yourself and try to be open to whatever it is you're seeing. And like I said, take a note of it because it might not make sense at the time, but it very well could later. And I love scrying as a means to talk with the deceased because for some reason I find it one of the easiest methods for receiving information. So if it does pique your interest at all, I would highly recommend trying it out as a form of communication. One of my recent times I was scrying using the trees while I was sitting and waiting for my husband who was in an appointment, and I saw my grandmother appear. I heard in my mind's eye something about a birdhouse in her backyard. I had no idea what it meant. I know she has birdhouses in her backyard, and I just thought that that was the end of it. So we ended the scrying session because my husband came out of his appointment, and I immediately moved on with my life. A few days later, I was talking to my mom, and I was telling her about my experience of seeing her mother who has passed away, and I mentioned the birdhouse. She stopped me immediately, telling me that my grandpa had actually taken down the birdhouse recently to clean it, and it had been a few weeks and he hadn't put it back up yet. So I immediately knew what my grandma had been trying to tell me. She wanted that birdhouse back up. But my grandparents' house is 1,500 miles away from me, and yet somehow I knew about the birdhouse, even though I didn't really know about the birdhouse. All that to say is keep an open mind, especially when trying to communicate with spirit or the deceased. Messages can be skewed, they can seemingly make zero sense, and then somehow out of nowhere make all the sense in the world. Be patient as you try to navigate mediumship. Allow your thoughts and feelings to flow through you without being judgmental, without trying to figure out what they mean, just letting them move. Be the student absorbing the information and give yourself time and space after the reading to help it all settle in and make sense. And please be sure you have spiritual protections in place if you do decide to try dabbling in mediumship or any other form of divination or connection with spirit. I really hope that this episode was helpful to you. It was the one solo episode that I've done, so let me know what you think about it. If you missed having a guest, let me know. Next week, we should be back to having a guest. I'm really excited to be talking next week about Samhain and how you can practice the witchiest time of the year. If you want to keep up with me, you can find me on Instagram or TikTok at Emerald Lotus Mystic. Check out my offerings at emeraldlotusdivination.com, and you can find me at my new Instagram, Spiritual Chats Pod, to find out more about this podcast.